Hey, and welcome back. Tonight we're travelling to a time when life depended on a spark. When fire wasn't just warmth, it was survival. In the deep winters of the medieval world, fire was a lifeline. It meant cooked food, protection from frost, light in the dark, and hope against illness and fear. But it wasn't easy. Fire had to be earned, kept alive, tended like a living thing. In this video, we'll explore how people in the Middle Ages used fire to stay alive, from village hearths to smoky cottages, from stone castles to crumbling huts. We'll walk through daily life, slowly, quietly, letting history unfold like it always does here, gently, with soft steps and low light. So, if you're here to wind down, you're in the right place. Let me know in the comments. What time is it where you are? Are you listening with a snack or curled up in bed already? Just drop a little note below. I read them all. Now close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's begin. It's cold, the kind of cold that settles in your chest and doesn't leave. Not just outside, but inside the house too. The walls are stone, the roof is thatch, the windows, if there are any, are little more than slits covered in oiled cloth. No glass, no warmth, just a slow, steady draft. You pull your cloak tighter and lean closer to the fire. That's the centre of the home. Always. A low hearth set into the floor, a cooking pot hanging from an iron hook, a few red embers glow beneath charred logs. Smoke curls upward, not into a chimney, but through a hole in the roof. If you're lucky, the smoke finds its way out. If not, it lingers, fills the room, settles in your clothes, clings to your hair, makes your eyes sting. But it's better than freezing. In the medieval world, fire wasn't just for cooking. It was a shield, a companion, a fragile boundary between life and death, especially in the deep winters, when food grew scarce and illness crept into the lungs. There's no turning a knob or flicking a switch. You started your fire by hand, flint against steel, sparks caught on dried moss or twisted straw. If you were lucky, you had tinder stored from the summer, dried carefully, kept away from the damp. You'd blow gently, coaxing the ember into flame, fingers numb, breath shaky. Sometimes it didn't catch, sometimes the cold won, and that was the danger, always. Because in a medieval cottage, if the fire went out in the middle of the night, you might not wake up. Families often kept it burning through the night, banking the embers under ash so they'd last until morning. You'd stir them gently at dawn, add twigs, then thicker branches, never too fast. Fire had to be fed slowly, like a living thing. Children were taught early, don't waste it. Don't play near it. Don't let it die. In some homes, they'd even carry a small ember from one house to another, wrapped in moss, cradled in a hollowed-out horn. If a neighbour's fire died, they might come knocking, shivering, asking for just a spark, and you'd share it because you might need theirs next week. Community wasn't just about kindness. It was about survival. Even the wealthier homes, stone halls with tapestries and long wooden tables, depended on fire in every room. Braziers filled with hot coals, hearths large enough to roast entire animals. But the cold still found its way in. Stone held the chill, wind crept through cracks. Servants rushed to lay kindling in the early hours, hoping to warm the chamber before the master woke. It rarely worked. The warmth never lasted long. You'd rise before dawn, breath visible in the air, fingers stiff, wrap your feet in cloth, throw a fur over your shoulders, and sit by the fire, waiting for the numbness to fade. In the village, it was worse. Most people lived in one-room cottages, mud walls, timber frames, floors made of packed earth. The fire was in the centre, no chimney, just smoke and soot. The ceiling blackened with years of it. But even so, it was the heart of everything. You cooked over it, slept beside it, told stories around it. You'd gather at night, eating slowly from wooden bowls, broth made from cabbage, beans, maybe a bit of salted meat if you were lucky. The pot stayed over the fire all day, added to and stirred and never really emptied. One long meal stretched over weeks. What mattered wasn't the taste, but the warmth. A full stomach helped you sleep, but warmth, that helped you live. Children curled near the hearth like cats. Elders, wrapped in whatever wool or fur could be spared, sat close enough to feel the heat on their bones. Everyone knew their place. Too close, and you risked a burn. Too far, and the cold crept in. It was balance, like everything else. Even light came from fire, no lamps, no bulbs, just candles if you could afford them, or rushlights, reeds soaked in animal fat. They smoked, they sputtered, but they gave you a few hours of flickering yellow glow, sometimes just enough to mend a tear, stir the pot, say a prayer. At night, most people didn't stay awake long. The darkness was deep. It pressed against the windows. Sounds carried. Wind, branches, footsteps in snow. And so you'd lie close, sharing warmth. Blankets were rare, beds were shared. Often, the whole family in one pile. Sometimes animals too, but you didn't mind. Their body heat helped keep you alive. And through the night, someone would rise now and then to check the fire, add a stick, stir the ash, make sure it didn't go out. Always checking, always tending. Fire never took care of itself. You might think that with time, people learned to control it, but it was never fully tame. A stray spark could burn a village down, a candle tipped too far, a gust through the door. People feared fire, respected it, prayed against it, and for it. Some households had rituals, a blessing when the fire was lit, a whispered word when it was extinguished. Certain days they wouldn't light a new one at all, out of fear, out of reverence, out of belief that fire could hear them. And maybe it could, because it responded to voices, to breath, to care. It danced when coaxed, it hissed when denied, it crackled in laughter and roared in warning. It was alive, and in winter, when frost curled on every surface and death walked softly outside the door, fire was the only thing that reminded you were still here, still breathing, still warm. By morning, the hearth is still breathing, or just barely. You kneel beside it, careful not to let your knees touch the cold earth for too long. The ashes are soft, grey, and still warm to the touch. You stir them gently. The embers glow, dim but alive. You add a twist of straw, a few dry twigs. Your breath is slow, gentle, intentional. The flame returns, slowly curling upward like it remembers you. The cottage smells of smoke and sleep. A few others are still bundled in their cloaks, heads buried under wool. Someone groans softly, stretching stiff limbs. Another pulls their feet closer to the fire without opening their eyes. You don't speak. There's no need. The day begins quietly, as most do, with fire and silence and cold air creeping through the walls. Outside, the frost has returned. The fields are stiff with it. Hooves break the thin crust of ice over the puddles in the road. Smoke rises from nearby homes. Thin trails that curl into the pale sky. Everyone's lighting fires this morning. Everyone's waking up the same way. In the manor house, the process is louder, faster. Servants rush through narrow halls carrying bundles of kindling and baskets of coal. In some rooms there are grates, in others, braziers. The larger hearths take longer to heat. Stone doesn't warm easily, it fights back. The fire must be built before the master wakes, before the lady's hands feel the chill in the linens, before the baby cries from the cold in the nursery. A girl no older than 12 works her way down the corridor, shoulders hunched, basket in arms. She lays wood piece by piece, striking flint quickly, too quickly, until her fingers ache. Her lips are cracked, her nails black with soot. She doesn't stop. Fire is her job, fire is how she keeps her place, and in places like these there's always someone waiting to take it if she falters. You've heard of castles too, grand ones with dozens of fireplaces and towers that catch the sun. They're beautiful from a distance, but inside, cold. Stone halls that echo, thick walls that trap the damp, rooms that never quite lose their chill. Even royalty didn't escape it. They simply hid from it better, layered in furs, surrounded by tapestries, draped in woolen robes. The fire in the great hall would be fed constantly, sometimes by entire logs the size of a man's leg. It burned day and night, but the corners of the room still stayed cold. The high ceilings let heat escape. The windows, covered in cloth or shutters, did little to keep the wind out, so they huddled close, sat near the flames, passed goblets of warm, spiced wine between fingers that never fully stopped trembling. Fire was a constant effort. In some villages there were no matches, no easy way to reignite a flame once it died. So people kept it going out of fear. Some kept coals in a clay pot, wrapped in damp cloth, carried across the day. Others buried embers in ashes to preserve them overnight. If it died completely, you'd go to a neighbour, ask for a coal, carry it home in a careful hand, cupped and cradled like a baby bird. It wasn't just practical, it was sacred. In some regions, it was bad luck to let the hearth go cold, worse luck to light it again without saying a prayer. Certain days were avoided, certain woods were never burned. Ash trees, for example, too sacred, too old. Some believed burning it brought sickness or summoned spirits. Superstition and survival were never far apart. There were stories told by the fire, always stories. Whispered tales of witches who stole warmth from a house, of spirits who lived in the hearth, of blessings that came from feeding the fire with breadcrumbs before sleep, just in case. You might laugh at it now, but when the dark closed in and you could hear wolves in the woods and your breath showed in front of your face indoors, those old stories didn't seem so foolish. They gave shape to fear. They gave reason to the cold. In the evenings, fire brought people together, not just for warmth, but for light, for company. You'd sit near it, stitching torn tunics or carving wooden spoons. Children played with scraps of cloth or sat wide-eyed as the elders spoke. The flickering glow danced across their faces. Shadows made monsters on the walls. And even in the quiet, there was a sense of safety. Outside, the cold pressed against the doors. The wind pushed at the shutters, but inside the fire stood guard, low and steady, crackling softly like it knew you needed to hear something familiar. There were nights when someone would play a stringed instrument, roughly made, softly plucked, or sing a tune passed down by grandparents, a song with words no one quite understood, but everyone knew how to hum. Even laughter came easier near the fire, even grief felt gentler. The warmth softened things, opened hearts, allowed a moment of rest in a world that rarely allowed for softness. And when it was time to sleep, you didn't stray far. Some laid blankets directly beside the hearth, heads tilted toward it like flowers to the sun. Others lay close together, sharing breath, dreaming of summer even as frost clung to the edges of the windows. One last stick would be added before bed. A final look, a quiet word. Sleep would come slowly, wrapped in the scent of smoke and wool and tired bodies. And fire, like a quiet friend, would keep watch. Morning doesn't always begin with light. In winter, it begins with breath, the shape of it curling in the air before your eyes. The fire has burned low again. You feel it before you even lift the blanket. That cold that waits at the edges of everything. Not sharp, not sudden, just a slow ache that never really leaves. Someone's already awake. You hear the rustling of wood, the clink of iron, a cough muffled in fabric. You stay still for a moment longer, listening to the rhythm of kindling being placed just right. The soft huff of breath as embers are stirred, a faint pop, and then the low sound of fire returning. It's a sound you know by heart, and with it the room begins to change. Slowly, shadows soften, the outline of the table becomes clearer, the pot still sits on the hook, the same pot that's held yesterday's soup and the day before that and the day before that. You rise. The floor is cold beneath your feet, always is. You take your place by the hearth, the same spot your mother sat before you, and hers before her. You press your hands toward the flame, letting the heat ease its way into your fingers. For now, that's enough. Outside, the day begins. People pass each other without many words, a nod, a glance. Everyone is cold, everyone is hungry, everyone understands. Chores are done quickly, wood is gathered, ashes are swept. A neighbour knocks, holding out a dull iron pan in need of coals. You give them a handful without hesitation. No one counts, no one asks, because if their fire dies tomorrow, it might be you knocking at their door. In monasteries, fire is a different kind of work. The brothers wake before the sun. Their days are measured not by hunger or warmth, but by prayer. Bells ring out across frosted courtyards, echoing through stone cloisters. The fire is kept in the refectory and the kitchen, not in their cells. They sleep cold as a rule. Suffering brings them closer to God, but still, they tend the flame, gently, faithfully. Bread is baked in the early hours. Coals are carried in iron buckets from one wing to another. A monk hums as he works, words from an old hymn slipping through his teeth. He's done this for years, no rush, no anger, just care. In town, the blacksmith is already at his forge. His fire is not soft, not subtle, it roars, it spits, it glows white at the centre.
He pumps the bellows with practiced strength, his arms steady despite the cold. Sparks fly, iron bends. The hammer falls again and again, ringing against the anvil. He doesn't flinch. This is the fire that shapes things. Horseshoes, nails, tools, weapons, hinges, chains. Without it, the village doesn't function, and so his fire is fed with discipline, with purpose. It is not comforting, it is demanding, alive with heat and sound and the scent of molten metal, but it too is part of survival. At the far end of the village, the baker works his own magic. His oven is clay, built into the wall, blackened from years of use. He knows its moods, its cracks, its temperature by feel alone. No gauges, no timers, just instinct. The loaves rise in rhythm with the heat. The smell drifts through the alleys. Flour, yeast, smoke. Children hover nearby, hoping for scraps. He never says much, but once in a while he breaks off a crust and hands it down with a quiet nod. Not charity, just life, and fire is behind it all. Later in the day, smoke begins to change shape. In the mid-afternoon light, you see the different colours rising from chimneys, pale and lazy from cooking fires, dark and heavy from forges, sweet-smelling from peat fires further west, sharp and bitter from burning damp wood that should have been dried longer. Each smoke trail tells a story of what's burning, of who's hungry, of what kind of day it's been. You head into the woods, a small axe slung across your back. You're not the only one. Others are already out, gathering sticks, dragging fallen limbs, looking for anything dry, dead trees, old branches, bark that peels clean. You work quietly, split wood, stack it, tuck small bits into your coat to keep them dry, because tonight it might rain, and you'll need something that catches quickly. You return just before sunset. The sky glows orange. The smoke from the cottages catches that colour and holds it. The smell of supper begins to rise. Onions, root vegetables, fat rendered into broth. A simple meal. Always the same, but always warm. You kneel at the hearth again, hands black with sap and bark dust. You add a piece of the new wood, watch it catch, listen. That low crackle, that soft sigh of flame breathing. There's comfort in it. Not safety, not completely, but a moment of peace. A boundary between now and the cold just beyond the door. And that's all fire ever was in the medieval world. A line drawn in heat and smoke. A reminder that you are still here. Still warm. Still alive. Night falls again, slowly. It comes early in winter, before the pot finishes boiling, before the tools are stored away, before the last bundle of firewood is brought in from the cold. The sun slips behind the trees, and the world outside the fire's reach fades into shadow. Inside, the glow returns. Someone feeds the hearth a few thicker logs. They catch with a low hiss, then settle into a steady flame. The smoke rises with purpose now, finding its way through the thatch and up into the dark. You sit nearby, bowl in hand. It's not a feast, a little broth. A piece of stale bread softened in the pot. Maybe a few slices of dried meat if you were lucky this week. But it's warm, and the warmth moves through you slowly, gently, easing something deep in your chest that you didn't know had tightened. Someone else plays with a twig poking the edge of the fire. The ember glows brighter where it touches. You tell them not to do that. Not so close. They listen, but not really. The fire's beautiful and dangerous. Everyone knows that. But it still pulls you in. The light flickers against the low ceiling. Shadows bend and move across the walls. Sometimes they look like animals. Sometimes like dancers. Sometimes like nothing at all. Just motion and colour, alive in the silence. Stories begin here. A woman starts one quietly, voice low. You've heard it before. About a man who wandered into the forest and found a house made of ash and smoke. Or a girl who followed a flame that moved without wind. Or a creature with eyes like burning coals that lived beneath the old mill and whispered promises into people's dreams. No one says whether they believe these stories. No one says they don't. That's the power of fire. It gives shape to things, dreams, fears, memories. It dances while you speak. It moves when no one touches it. It eats without a mouth. It speaks without a voice. And it always wants more. In some villages, fire was used to test the truth. They'd heat iron till it glowed, then ask the accused to carry it in their hands. If their skin didn't blister, they were innocent. Or they'd place a rock in a cauldron of boiling water and make someone pull it out barehanded. If their burns healed clean in 3 days, the gods had forgiven them. You don't know if that ever really worked, but you know people believed it, and belief was sometimes the only thing people had. Even in death, fire had a role. In some places they burned the bodies, not everywhere, not always, but sometimes, to keep the spirit from lingering, to send the soul upward in smoke, to keep the dead from returning, cold and hungry and angry. You remember once, when a child died in the village, too young and too suddenly, they burned sage in the corners of the house, left embers on a plate by the door. No one entered for 3 days. You were too young to understand then, but you remember the smell, the weight of it, and how quiet the house became after. Fire keeps memory too. The ashes from the first hearth you built are still there, buried under newer ones, the same spot, the same stones. Every night a little of what came before is still burning. That's the thing about medieval fires. They were never just fire. They were time. You could track your life by them. How high the flames burned the night your sister married. How dim they were the winter the rains came and everything grew mould. How bright they seemed the day your brother brought home bread and didn't say where he got it. Everything happened near the fire. Birth, death, arguments, laughter, love, silence. Always there. Always burning. Even when you couldn't see it, you could feel it. Even when it scared you, you still needed it. And tonight, like so many nights before, it burns again. The logs are thick, the ashes deep. The light reaches every corner of the room. It makes the wool shine. It catches in your eyes. It turns the dust in the air into gold. You lie near it, not too close. You wrap yourself in what little warmth the fire offers, and the room breathes with you, softly, steadily, like it always has. It's the middle of the night. The fire is lower now, just a deep orange glow at the centre. No flames, just embers, soft and pulsing like a heartbeat. You open your eyes and look toward it, not because you meant to wake, but because the cold touched your feet. It's always the cold that finds you first. You don't speak. No one does. Most are still asleep, breathing slowly, curled in whatever warmth they could gather. A few shapes move, quietly shifting beneath their blankets. One person rises, rubbing their arms, stepping softly to the fire to stir it back to life. They kneel, at a small log, the embers blink, then catch, then breathe. It's not dramatic, just necessary. Because if the fire dies completely, the whole house will know, and the cold will win. This is what people don't always understand about fire in the old world. It wasn't a decoration, it wasn't ambience, it was work, it was a daily task, a shared responsibility, a skill passed down through generations. People could tell how well a home was kept by how steady the fire burned. A home where the hearth never failed was a home with discipline, with rhythm, with care. You remember being taught, not just how to light it, but how to listen to it, how to know when the wood was wet, when the wind would pull the flame too hard, when to bank it under ash, and when to let it breathe. How to use peat instead of logs if it had rained too much. How to split the bark just so it would catch faster. It wasn't just about warmth, it was about life management. Even cooking was a balance of flame and time. Bread too close to the coals would blacken, a stew too far from the heat would spoil. You watched your elders move pots and pans around the hearth without ever checking with their hands. They just knew. Everything revolved around the fire, chores were arranged around it, meals built from what cooked best over it, schedules kept by how long a log would burn. Even when people got married, fire played a part. A new couple might receive coals from their parents' hearth, carried in a covered dish still warm, a piece of home passed into their new life. It was symbolic, yes, but it was also practical, because starting from scratch was dangerous, and a fire already burning meant safety from night one. In colder regions, entire villages would hold ceremonies when fire was relit in spring. After months of harsh cold, after the hardest snows, the fire that kept burning was honoured, praised. Sometimes even given offerings, bread, wine, herbs, dropped into the flame with quiet thanks. And in homes that couldn't keep their fires, they relied on others. Shared hearths weren't rare. Neighbours would gather in one house for warmth and stay through the night. Children slept in groups near the fire. Elders were given the warmest spots closest to the flames. No one asked questions, everyone understood. In places where people had nothing, fire was the last thing shared. You remember one winter, the worst you've known. The wood was gone, the food nearly gone, the road frozen too solid to fetch more supplies, and still one fire stayed lit. The old woman at the edge of the village kept hers going. No one knows how. Every night people gathered there, sitting shoulder to shoulder, passing bowls of broth so thin you could see the bottom. But the fire stayed. And because of it, so did they. No one forgot that. Fire was trust, memory, survival. But it was still dangerous. A single ember in the wrong place, and everything could vanish. There were fires that took whole villages. Thatched roofs caught fast. Dry beams turned to flame in seconds. The wind carried sparks to neighbouring homes. There was little anyone could do. Buckets were passed hand to hand, water flung, blankets thrown over burning doors, but often it wasn't enough. And afterward, just ash, smoke, silence. It happened in the dark usually, when no one was watching, and so people watched. Even when they slept, one ear stayed open, one eye flicked toward the hearth. Because fire, for all it gave, demanded respect. It never belonged to you. It only stayed if you earned it. Tonight it's burning steady again. The log has caught. The room is warmer. You shift slightly, pulling the blanket closer under your chin. The firelight flickers against the rafters. You hear someone breathing softly beside you. Another sighs, and then turns, their back now to the glow. The night holds its rhythm, and the fire watches it all. By now the fire feels like the oldest thing in the room. It's not just light, not just heat, it's presence. A quiet witness to everything that's happened between these walls. It knows the rhythm of the house, the pace of your breathing, the shape of the days and nights that came before. You've lost count of how many nights you've stared into it, watching embers shift like tiny suns. Even now you watch them. Red, orange, gold, moving and dimming and flaring up again. And every flicker feels familiar. Because in a world where little changed, the fire always stayed. Even when it changed shape, it was still there. In the kitchen, where the bread was left to rise beside it. In the birthing room, where screams echoed and wet cloth steamed beside the flames. In the stillness after funerals when no one spoke, and the fire gave the only comfort. And in the moments that didn't seem important, patching a torn cloak, pulling splinters from a child's foot, slicing roots into the pot, fire was there too. You learned to keep it company, to sit with it even when nothing needed doing, to stir it gently just to see the glow beneath the ash, to hum without words as it cracked softly, answering in little pops. There's a silence that only comes in firelit rooms. It's not empty. It's full of memory, full of air warmed by breath, full of softness that the outside world didn't offer. You remember guests coming through the door, hands rubbed together, cheeks red from wind. They'd step toward the fire before speaking, and everyone would make space, always, even if it meant one less blanket, even if it meant someone shifting further into the cold corner, because warmth was a welcome, and fire was how you showed it. Hospitality wasn't a choice, it was a rule, unspoken but iron. If someone knocked at your door in the dead of winter, you gave them a place by the fire, a bowl of something hot, a place to sit even if it was the floor. You didn't ask why, you didn't ask how long, because you might need them tomorrow, and they might be the reason your fire keeps burning next week. You remember the nights after feast days, when people gathered with full bellies and loosened belts and sang into the smoke. Not always in tune, not always in harmony, but together. And the fire roared with them, rising and dipping with the voices. It flickered on mugs, on flushed cheeks, on bare feet tapping the packed earth, on hands clapping, on eyes closing for just a moment, soaking in the warmth like sun. You remember the smell. Wood smoke, fat, wine, sweat, laughter. A mixture you could never bottle, a mixture you'd never want to forget. And even on quiet nights, most nights, when there were no songs, no guests, no feasts, just you and the hush and the wind beyond the walls, fire was still enough. You'd sit near it, stare at it, let your thoughts rise with the smoke. Not every night needed words. Some nights were made just for surviving, and fire was how you did that. Sometimes it went out. Sometimes the wind found its way inside and stole the flame. You'd wake cold, fingers curled to your chest, breath caught in your throat. You'd feel the panic before your eyes opened, reach for the hearth before you even stood. Cold ash. No glow, Nink's ember, just silence. And then the steps. Get up. Don't wait. Don't think. Bundle up, step into the cold, knock on a neighbour's door. Do you have a coal to spare? And they always did. Because that's what fire taught everyone, right? It wasn't yours, it wasn't theirs, it was shared, passed, protected, not just for comfort, not just for cooking, for life. And when it came back, when the spark caught again, and the smoke rose and the flame curled upward with that first orange bloom, you didn't speak. You just breathed deeper and sat down and felt human again.
Now it's late. The fire is low again, but still alive. It always is, somehow. You lie near it, eyes half closed. The day has passed, but it doesn't feel gone. Its pieces are still here, in the warmth, in the quiet, in the slow fading crackle from the hearth. The room has settled. No one speaks anymore. No more stories, no more footsteps, no more scraping of bowls or shifting of stools, just the steady breath of sleeping bodies. And fire, still glowing, still breathing, still holding back the cold that waits beyond the walls. You wonder how many fires like this are burning right now, in this same night across other cottages, other towns. How many families are asleep beside theirs? How many hearths were passed down stone by stone? How many lives have been shaped by this one small thing? It isn't grand, it isn't powerful, but it never needed to be. It was the centre, the quiet middle of everything. And even now, in your world full of buttons and lights and switches, maybe that's why fire still pulls you in. A campfire, a candle, a fireplace on a screen, a soft flicker on the wall. It reminds you of something older, something patient, something warm, something human, the kind of thing you don't need to explain. You just sit beside it. You just let it burn.